Squire. I'd also like to welcome David Marr, official guest, and also a very warm welcome to our distinguished guests, to our local member for Willoughby and the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Peter Collins, to representatives from the Royal Australian Institute of Architects, Tim Marr and Jennifer Hill, to councillors Sue Randall, Councillor Mary Jane Morgan, Councillor Mary Johnston, Councillor Pam Riley and Councillor Elizabeth Morgan. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today. It's lovely to see you and we're so pleased with the lovely weather. Today is a very special occasion. It is 75 years since Griffin set up the Great Sydney Development Association, which was established to develop Castle Crag, and we all know the wonderful work that he put into it, and we hope to keep on his wonderful community he established. We're all familiar with the architecture and the town planning that he established here, and he also established a community, and I think today is representative of that wonderful community. And without more ado, I'd like to introduce the Mayor, Councillor John Squire. Thank you.
The member for Willoughby and the State Opposition Leader, Mr. Peter Collins, special guest, Mr. David Marr, Burley Griffin Society President Adrian Cabos, Professor James Werrick, to councillors Sue Randall, Pat Riley, Mary Jane Morgan, Mary Johnson and Louise Weingarth, and I haven't missed anyone there. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, well, what a wonderful day it is. This morning when I woke up I heard the wind blowing and I thought it was raining. And I thought, oh no, we should have put it off for another 24 hours. However, when I looked out the window there was the beautiful sunshine. And can I say it is a pleasure to have been invited here to officiate at the Burley Griffin Festival and to join you all in celebrating the work and contribution to our society of a great man. I would particularly like to thank the member for Willoughby and State Opposition Leader Mr. Peter Collins for always showing his support with regard to the Burley Griffin and indeed Castle Crag. As you all know, today marks the 75th anniversary of the establishment of Castle Crag, a suburb that was established and developed like no other, I know. In recent years, the importance of preserving our environment in the face of urban development has come to the fore in our society, and happily, environmental development controls have been established. We all know here in the city of Willoughby just how that has happened over the years. But Walter Burley Griffin was way ahead of his time in this respect, founding the Greater Sydney Development Association in 1920 to establish an urban development in harmony with the natural beauty of Middle Harbour. 75 years later, and this ideal lives on, making Castle Crag one of the most environmentally aware and socially vibrant communities in not only Willoughby, but I would dare to say in the entire country. Walter Burley Griffin left Willoughby a phenomenal legacy that has been crucial to the preservation of what I believe is one of Sydney's greatest natural assets. The importance of his contribution to our community is made evident by all of the people who have worked so hard to prepare this event, and by all of you who are here today who have gathered to celebrate your own sense of community spirit, which is truly rare in things in today's world, but not so rare in Willoughby City because we have a wonderful community spirit here. I've always sing the praises of that wherever I go. For the length and breadth of the whole city, I would say that we are one of the unique areas of local government in Sydney that have that particular spirit. And of course it shows here today very much so in Castle Crag. All of the events planned today will be absolutely enthralling, and I would like to thank Professor James Werrick for coming along to present what will be a very enlightening talk on the Greater Sydney Development Association, and also Mr. David Moore, who will open the fantastic exhibition of Max Chapane photographs. And as we all know, and being an old photographer myself, the great contribution that the late Max Chapane paid to photography and indeed recording everything throughout that era in Australia. And to make it more important, Max, of course, was a resident of Castle Crag, and that's something that we're all very proud. But I think that probably the most exciting part of this festival will be the opening of the Walter Burley Griffin homes for the first time in 20 years. And I'd like to extend my deepest appreciation on behalf of everyone here today to the owners of those homes for opening your doors to the world. And can I just say that with the Walter Burley Griffin over the years, and when we think back to the planning that he had in his mind in those times, and remembering of course the Castle Frag was very different in those days than what it is today, but it was the forerunner of helping to maintain open space around the homes, and I think that's something that's been maintained, something that we must fight for, particularly when we think in terms of today and that terrible thing of dual occupancy which we all have had tended to live with over the last 4 years. So with our continued fight to have those rules changed on that particular issue, I think we're helping to preserve perhaps and look further down the track along the lines of what Walter Burley Griffin intended. However, today is a great day of celebration. I say congratulations to all those who have taken part, particularly to the Walter Burley Griffin Society, and thank you indeed for inviting Anne and I to be part of this very important celebration. Thank you.
And thank you very much for those lovely warm words, and I'd like to endorse the Mayor's thanks to Mr. Peter Collins for his support of Griffin heritage. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, David Marr. Thank you.
This is a week for confessions, and I thought I should begin with a confession of my own, which is that I grew up in Pymble. And every Sunday when I was a kid, my parents would send us all off to Sunday school. This puzzled me because my parents never were and are not now religious people. And it wasn't in fact till quite recently I read an interesting study on the uses of Sunday school, which was of course to provide a little sexual privacy on Sunday mornings for parents by emptying otherwise crowded houses, that I began to glean why my parents assiduously every Sunday sent us off to Sunday school. And the trip between my house and Sunday school was a fascinating one for me because it led through the varied topography, and not terribly varied topography of Pymble and its houses. But right at the very end, just before you got to the hideousness of St Swithin's Church, you passed, if you were a little kid, one of the Pratton houses that Burley Griffin built in Telegraph Road. And that house for me was this continuously mysterious and self-assured presence. This calm building which explained nothing of itself. It was just there and finished and beautiful, and its calmness and its refusal to explain, its refusal really to charm, gave it for me great mythic power when I was a kid. It was the foreign part of Pymble. It was in fact that only little part of Pymble which suggested there was an outside world. And I was very grateful for it. I was surprised, though, to read in the new book of, that book of Peter Harrison's, which is not really a new book about Griffin, but which has just been published, as you know, by the National Library. I was surprised to read that apparently Griffin got no pleasure from building the two great houses he did for the Prattons. There's that one on Telegraph Road and there's one further along, two mansions. According to Peter Harrison, he got much more pleasure from building the unostentatious domestic retreats of Castle Crag. And even at this distance, I feel a twinge of jealousy. Later, I lived for a while in Balmain, and that meant that on bus journeys to and from work, I passed the incinerator. And when I was first working on the Bulletin back in the early 1970s, the incinerator was still, if you didn't get up too close to it, was still complete. And either side of the bay that you travelled on, the site of the incinerator was one of those gloriously beautiful, unimaginably perfect things about being in Sydney. One of the three most perfectly, I argue, three most perfectly sited buildings in this city: Carthona on the point of Darling Point, the Opera House, and the incinerator. The shame of the incinerator's departure will live with us in this city for a very, very long time. It's gone. Now placed there is one of the ugliest blocks of flats built in human history, and an unnecessary but rather delightful bridge. But the incinerator has gone. So here today we are celebrating survivals, and we're celebrating Walter Burley Griffin. It's easy to write a biography of Griffin and of Marion Marnie and say that they were another couple of harvested tall poppies, that they came to this country, that their vision was misunderstood, and that they left kind of broken, and that we did it to them, we Australians did it to them again, just as we did later on to Utzon. It's perfectly possible to construct that biography. I'd like to suggest, in opening today's proceedings, another biography that we should pay attention to for them. The Griffins were foreign imaginations who came to this country, and we are at the moment at a time of great cultural chauvinism, which I personally dislike very much. There is so much rhetoric in the air at the moment of finding our identity through the arts, and it's a kind of a national political identity which we're being urged to find. There's a great deal of importance in finding our identity and doing it through the arts, but for the Griffins, these were foreigners, and they came here with a foreign imagination, and I love them and I honour them for that. Of course, they were completely dotty when they arrived. Remember their plans? They were going to plant each hill in Canberra with a different coloured bush. There was going to be a pink hill and a blue hill and a white hill. But the wonderful thing about this country is that we showed them, even though we didn't know it ourselves, how this country should be looked at. And it ended, of course, with Marion Marnie Griffin standing somewhere down here, waving her arms around and saying, "Walter and I want all this to remain Voyaging Bush." But we, to some extent, see this country and see the possibilities of cities in this country now through the eyes of the Burley Griffins and their foreign eyes that came here and showed us what was possible. And in recognising the tremendous work of the Burley Griffin Society in holding things together here, and in looking at and not for a moment denying the wonderful things that, of course, homegrown and native talent has to do in this country and does all the time, I think today might be an occasion when we also dip our lid just a little, to the foreigners who come and show us what is possible. This suburb is, frankly, if I can say this, a failure. It is not what the Griffins wanted. It is not what might have been here. I'm very glad to hear from Willoughby Council now some enthusiasm for a subdivision and a town and a place which they fought so bitterly to begin with. I'm very glad that the stumps of what might have been a great forest survive here. We are all grateful for Peter Collins taking another one of his high-octane and big money punts in the arts to make sure that GDSA number 1 is in the beautiful state and survives as it does now. But this is not what it might have been. What it is, however, through all of your work, this wonderful reminder of what is possible in this country when something absolutely new and unexpected and calm and original and quite dotty comes here and builds. And it's for that I'd like to honour the 75th anniversary of this subdivision and declare it, I think this is my role now, Adrian, and to declare it open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for your wonderful words of wisdom about our foreign imagination and our dotty heritage. But I would like to assure you that it's very wonderful heritage, and I hope you all enjoy seeing the open houses today. We've got a big program today. At 11 o'clock there's the official opening by David Moore of the photographic exhibition, which is really a wonderful treat. Photographs by Max Dupayne of Griffin Heritage. And then we have 3 walking tours through the wonderful reserves and walkways of Castle Crag. It won't go through all of them. They're roughly about an hour and a half, those walking tours, and you'll only see a glimpse of them, but they're really wonderful walkways and reserves. And then, of course, when the houses close at 3 o'clock this afternoon, the procession will lead from here, from the marquee, led by Willoughby Brass Band and the giant puppets. You will have noticed on your way here the puppets of Walter and Marion. And it will go down to the Haven Amphitheatre, wind its way down, and there the brass band will play for another 15 minutes or so before Professor James Werrick's talk about the wonderful shareholders of the Greater Sydney Development Association, Griffin's company. They were an interesting group of people, including people from the arts, Chinese investors and politicians. So I recommend all those things to you today. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I'd particularly like to thank all the people that have helped with today. It's been 12 months almost in the making, and we've had a huge team of helpers. I can't mention them all by name. We've got well over 70 people helping, and many of them started at 7 o'clock this morning, so I thank them all. I'd particularly like to mention 3 groups. Firstly, the owners of the Griffin houses, who have so kindly and generously opened their house for today. This is once in nearly, as the Mayor said, nearly 20 years that a group of houses have been opened on any one occasion. All the assistants today, and especially the committee members of the Waterbury Griffin Society, and they really have put it in a huge team effort, a huge amount of work. And I'd like to mention them by name because of their incredible hard work. They include Brian Barnett, Max Burke, Colleen Fry, Kerry McKillop, Councillor Sue Randall, Howard Ruby, Archie Van Optrock, Anne Watson, Trevor Waters and Professor James Werrick. And of course, I'd also like to thank our wonderful piper, Graham Wood, who will pipe you round to the exhibition about 11:15. So thank you very much. If you could join with me and thank everybody. And just as a closing gesture, I would ask the Mayor and David Marr to come and cut our birthday cake for the GSDA, the 75th birthday cake. So please. Oh, they're squabbling about it. Come on, both of you. Come on, David.
I'm going. I can't think of Mayor.
We'll take it in turns then. The Mayor first and then David. And there'll be a piece for everybody.
I just said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't photograph too well on my own, so I think David should come.
Strangest wedding I've ever been to.
Thank you very much, everybody, and come and join us with cake, please.
Oh,
He told him.
And but he can tell you, you know.
Yes.
The Japanese still in mind, I think they're not fighting for years. Yeah, the whole world published anyway. That's a,
Oh, this is wonderful. Bye. Lawson actually owned the Fishwick House in the Citadel for about 30 years, so choice is real, Castle Craig. See if you know what's a little bit of lily to the front door.
Authority, when Douglas was mounted in equity in this case, trying to break the control that Griffin had over the company. And Griffin was extremely tenacious in fighting this battle, and he won that one, but the company lost. So the company had lost 2 significant court cases, and they lost £2,500 in legal fees, which was quite significant at that time. They also, of course, were beginning to feel the effects of the Depression. And from 1948 onwards, of course, that was very much part of the Australian commercial scene. The whole possibility of the GSDA venture taking off is like a problem that any land developer has to this day. There's enormous problems of upfront costs and the necessity to bring on stream various parcels of land and to have enough sales to carry on the development. And what the company had done was that it succeeded fairly well with Castle Craig in terms of selling land. Not many people have built here, certainly land had sold. And then they wanted to develop Middle Cove, as we call it today, Cove Craig in Griffin's time, and Castle Cove. And for this, they needed, of course, capital. And the company borrowed £30,000 just on the brink of the Depression, and had started to lay out the roads, which we now know go out all the way up through what is today the Harold Reed Reserve. But they were unable to sell that land. It wasn't in the final state where it could be put on the market. And so they were in this very, very difficult situation of having all their capital tied up this loan money tied up in land which they couldn't realise upon at a time when there's a terrific downturn in the whole global economy. And so there's a lot of pressures within the shareholders. And I've got some just amazing reports written by the more conservative members of the shareholders, led by a man called C.J. Serrity, who'd come in a few years later. He was the Auditor General of the Commonwealth and had a very keen eye for an account ledger. And he would write endless reports. Mr. Griffin's incompetence in finance. Mr. Griffin's incompetence as an architect. Mr. Griffin's incompetence as a surveyor. Mr. Griffin's incompetence in engineering. Mr. Griffin's interest in other estates. This was another issue which really concerned the shareholders because, in fact, the land that we're on here is the Haven estate, which is an addition to the Castle Crag estate, but it wasn't owned by the Greater Sydney Development Association. It was owned by a syndicate, which included Walter and Marion Griffin and James Irvine from Melbourne, who was also an investor in the GSDA. But Griffin was promoting this land as well as the GSDA land, where he was managing director, and they saw this of interest. Of course, from Griffin's perspective, what he was trying to do was to buy up all of the foreshore land of Castle Crag, which he hadn't been able to get in the first marvelous parcel, so that the foreshore would be protected for the citizens of Sydney forever, because the shareholders didn't quite see it in that light. And they put together all sorts of extremely committed petitions and so on, trying to place the company into liquidation, which would then inevitably break Griffin's control forever, you see. And this was fought through an incredibly skillful campaign, delaying campaign and diplomatic campaign, where I think Eric Nichols played the key role. Edgar Deans was the company secretary, who was keeping the company going through this very difficult time with almost no income, and some very, very careful diplomatic manoeuvres led really by Eric Nichols, meeting between these disaffected shareholders and Griffin through that time. It had problems from the very beginning, and the owner wanted to sue Griffin, and eventually she got expert witnesses from her doctors and Macquarie Street specialists about how unhealthy the house was. This is one letter from Dr. Archibald Collins from Macquarie Street, Sydney, saying, "I found 3 types of soakage had occurred. 1, through the roof. 2, through the floor. 3, through the walls." So the shareholders, had reason to be a little bit concerned about the reputation that the Castle Crag estate had in Sydney. But they, in many ways, never wavered from the idea that something different should be done on this land. They could see just how extraordinarily beautiful it was. They could see how sensitive it was in terms of a landscape and in terms of overall contribution to Sydney as a place. And then in the immediate post-war period, they were in a very difficult situation. They had been waiting 30 years really to realise on this fantastic asset, and they were, of course, capital rich with no cash flow, and they were just ripe for a takeover at that point. And at first, they negotiated again through I think the brilliance of Eric Nichols, a very good joint venture proposal with Düsseldorf, then just starting up their lease, and Middle Cove was developed as a joint venture between the company and their lease at the time. And I think that the layout of the streets and so forth of Middle Cove is in the spirit of the sensitivity of the original intentions, although many of the basic architectural expressions are very, very different. Of course, there had been one great change at that time, and that is as a result of the amazing problems they have on accrued land taxes and rates and so on, the company was in a very vulnerable situation, and the Cumberland County Council essentially forced them to sell key parcels of the land to put into the county open space system. And thank goodness that happened, because that's how we got the Harold Reid Reserve and the much wider reserves down here on Sailors Bay. But nevertheless, Middle Cove went ahead, And then in the late 50s, early 60s, the story which the Griffins really put before us, I think is still a true success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James, for that fascinating talk. I was most delighted to hear about the blast of cold air, which got colder and colder, I felt, as James proceeded. A really fascinating talk, James. Just a few things to close off with. The Griffins established this wonderful suburb and this wonderful amphitheatre, and the community that the Griffins established here, as James has pointed out, continues, and looking after the Haven Amphitheatre is a community committee, and they organise events here on a regular basis. And I'd like to introduce Howard Ruby, who's the president of the management committee for the Haven Amphitheatre, just to tell you about the next venue here, and then I'll come back just to close it.
Of you this afternoon, this morning while I was driving the bus, trying to pick up those who are a little tired climbing up the bulwark. Good. And a lot of people have asked me as to what is the next event here at the Haven Amphitheatre. Now, it's a very, very big one. In fact, it's the biggest one that we've really attempted since Griffin and those people built these magnificent Greek castles up on the side of the hill here and danced around the place in bed sheets. Now, sorry, James, but I'm sure they all have a wonderful time. Now, on the 24th of September, Sunday afternoon, we are having the leading soprano from the Australian Opera, who took one look at this space here, came down about a year ago and said, look, I want to sing here. Now, her name is Elizabeth Knell, and she's presently the lead singer. She's actually starring in the book at the Opera House. I think she sings on Wednesday night. And she's coming to give a performance here on the 24th, and it's a sort of a family concert that she's doing. It's an opera singer singing music all the way from Bizet right up to many Australian tunes, up to Peter Allen, and maybe she might even squeeze in Wilson Matilda, who's to know. But it's basically a family concert. We're actually getting because of who she is, we're getting a full concert grand on the stage, and she's being supported by 50 voices from the Willoughby Choir, the Willoughby Symphony Choir. So it's going to be a very, very, very exciting afternoon on that day in Castlecraig, and if you could possibly make it, it'll be something that you won't get the chance to see again. So mark that date and come and join us on that afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. Well, just to close, I'd like to thank you all for coming today and joining in our 75th anniversary. And I'd like to thank the many, many people who have made today possible. It's been a huge team, and it's really been very inspiring to see everybody work so closely together. I hope so many people enjoy the efforts. But work, it's been 12 months in the planning by the committee of the Waterbury Griffin Society, and today's effort started off at 7 a.m. up at the marquee where the council, Willoughby City Council helpers, staff came and erected the marquee for us, and there was a big team of assistants with the puppets. They're very heavy, as you may have noticed in the procession coming down. There's been behind the scenes work, giving the puppets some love and care and new paint. Daddy Harvey helped in that regard. We've got a wonderful sound team led by Howard and Larry Hilder. I can't mention everybody today, but I would like to thank them all very much. They've been curators, Arthur Van Oftrop and Colleen Fry of the photographic exhibition. It just is really wonderful and inspiring. The people who helped with the guided tours of the walkways and reserves, and of course the procession led by Willoughby Brass Band. Thank you very, very much. You've probably all got a program today. In that program is a map of Castlecraig, but also a membership form to Waterbury Griffin Society. And just a plug, we'd love some more members, and we keep you in touch with what's happening. So without much ado, thank you very much all for coming, and I look forward to hearing a couple more numbers from the Willoughby Brass Band. Thank you very, very much to the Willoughby Brass Band for joining us today.